There's signed text now, and a 60-day clock on the Strait of Hormuz that may run out before a single tanker dares to move. If you're just joining, here's where we were. U.S.-Iran diplomacy had moved from mediated drafts toward an announced memorandum, with American, Pakistani, and Iranian officials all confirming a deal was on the table. The open question was implementation. Tehran tied its commitments to a frozen assets release and nuclear talk sequencing, while the wider war could still be pulled back open by Lebanon, Hormuz, or allied military action.
This is Iran War Daily. Today, a real signature on the page, and the messy part. Who pays for it? And whether anyone tells Israel about Lebanon.
Let's start with the document itself. PM Shehbaz Sharif announced the electronic signing from Islamabad, and the White House released the full text at the G7 in France. After a week of competing descriptions, we finally have a public instrument.
$300 billion in reconstruction money for Iran, and a 60-day toll-free Hormuz reopening. Who's writing that check, Sarah? Because nobody at the G7 is volunteering their treasury.
ABC News Australia lists both, the fund and the 60-day window, as pieces of the same signed document, which helps reconcile what looked like competing accounts earlier in the week.
60 days gets you the trial subscription version of a reopening. BIMCO's still flagging mine risk, and you've got 118 tankers stranded. Underwriters don't write fresh war risk cover against a clock that expires in 2 months.
That's the live tension. The MoU calls it a first step, conditional and time-limited, rather than a permanent restoration. So the deadline cuts both ways. Can insurance and physical safety timelines fit inside 60 days? Or does the window close before commercial operators commit?
My money's on the window closing first. A premium quote takes weeks, mine clearance verification takes longer, and no captain moves crude on a politician's promise.
On the signatory question I've been pressing all week, it's now described as signed by U.S. and Iranian leadership, per Express Tribune and ABC News Australia. I still want the exact Iranian title named, but the authority gap is closed enough to stop asking who's at the table.
And the IAEA? That board voted 21-3 demanding Iran declare its stockpiles. I don't see an inspection timeline anywhere in this text.
You're right. No sourcing today confirms a verification mechanism in the document, so the IAEA demand now has to be squared with a signed instrument, not just a draft. The hole didn't close, it got papered over. Now Lebanon, and this is where events on the ground stop matching the commitment. UPI reported Israeli strikes on Beirut dated June 14th, with Israel accusing Hezbollah of a ceasefire violation. That was before the MoU was signed.
And Israel isn't a signatory. So the MoU commits to ending operations on every front, including Lebanon, and the one party actually bombing Beirut never put a name on the page.
Which means the breach question is live now. Who gets to declare a violation of a signed instrument, and against what mechanism, when the most active shooter isn't bound by it?
Nobody. That's the answer. A breach clause is worthless if your most dangerous actor isn't on the contract.
Then there's Pakistan as broker. Islamabad being the named mediator is genuinely novel. The question is what leverage Shehbaz Sharif actually has over Washington and Tehran to keep them serious past day one.
Leverage? Pakistan brokered the announcement. Enforcing a 60-day Hormuz window and a $300 billion fund, that's a different muscle, and I don't think Islamabad's got it.
So this is where the week landed. Anonymous claims about a draft became a head of government announcing a signed public text, a real step up on the U.S.-Iran track, with Lebanon, the front still shooting, left entirely outside the instrument.
If U.S.-Iran deal negotiations matters to you, hit follow. We'll be back on it soon.
From Express Tribune.
He added that the memorandum would enter into force immediately, and as a first step, Islamic Republic of Iran will instantly reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and the United States of America will immediately lift the naval blockade.
Update on U.S.-Iran talks. It's signed. PM Shehbaz Sharif announced it on X this morning. The Islamabad MoU, electronically signed by President Trump and President Pezeshkian, with Sharif endorsing as mediator. And it's in force immediately. The first step, per Sharif, Iran instantly reopens the Strait of Hormuz, and the U.S. lifts the naval blockade.
Instantly and immediately. Okay, but Hormuz doesn't care about a signature. You've still got mine risk warnings and 118 tankers sitting there waiting on underwriters who don't move on a press release. And notice the verb, reopen. Naval blockade lifted, fine. But the war risk premium and the insurance clock don't reset because a president clicked sign.
One naming note before we move on. Sharif thanks Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei and President Pezeshkian. So the leadership question I've been pressing all week is answered. This carries the top of the Iranian chain, not just a foreign ministry.
Who's holding the pen on the U.S. side, though? Vance, Witkoff, Kushner negotiating? That tells me where the leverage and the money conversations actually live.
ABC News, Australia, writes,
U.S. and Iran have officially signed a memorandum of understanding for an immediate and permanent ceasefire on all fronts, as the White House released the full text at the G7 in France.
Here's what's different from the Islamabad announcement we just hit. The White House put the full text on the table at the G7 in France. We're reading the document now, not just descriptions of it.
And the number jumps right out. Toll-free Hormuz reopening for an initial 60 days. Initial. The clock's already running.
There's also a $300 billion reconstruction fund for Iran and removal of sanctions on Iranian oil, per ABC Australia. Trump's calling it a success. Tehran's confirming it won't procure or develop nuclear weapons.
60 days toll-free. You've got 118 tankers stranded. BIMCO still flagging mine risk. Can underwriters actually get war risk premiums down and ships moving before that window slams shut? Because if it expires first, the reopening is a press release.
And that gap only gets tighter. Iran confirms no nuclear weapons, but the IAEA board demanded a stockpile declaration, 21-3. I don't see an inspection timeline in what's been released today. UPI, with Danielle Haynes.
The Israeli military launched an attack on Hezbollah targets in Beirut on Sunday, accusing the group of violating a ceasefire agreement earlier in the day and throwing an Iranian peace deal into question.
So we just heard the Islamabad MoU is signed, the text released, ending operations on every front including Lebanon. And here's UPI from June 14. Israel hitting an apartment in Beirut's southern suburbs, blaming Hezbollah for breaking a ceasefire.
Note the date, Rich. That strike predates the signing. So the sharper question now, Israel never signed this MoU. The commitment to end Lebanon operations binds whom exactly?
Right, and UPI's reporting forced displacement orders for 24 towns in South Lebanon, at least 5 dead in recent days. That front is still active. Evacuation orders, fresh casualties, and a new signature trying to sit beside it.
And if Israel does strike again, who declares a breach, and against what mechanism? The instrument names U.S. and Iranian leadership. It doesn't name an enforcer for the party that isn't in it.
So Tehran gets a $300 billion reconstruction fund on paper, and Beirut gets evacuation orders. Cute deal. Okay, step back for me. Why is Pakistan the one brokering this deal? Like, what does Islamabad actually bring to the table that makes Washington and Tehran pick up the phone?
At first, it sounds odd, but it does make some structural sense. Pakistan has a land border with Iran to the west, so instability next door isn't abstract for Islamabad. CFR notes Pakistan spent years as a diplomatic pariah, which makes this mediation role a real rehabilitation. Weirdly, that outsider status also means neither Washington nor Tehran automatically reads it as the other side's stalking horse. And the personal channel matters here. BBC News reported that President Trump called Pakistan's army chief, Field Marshal Asim Munir, his favorite field marshal, and said Munir knows Iran better than most. Munir, not just the civilian government, has been leading the shuttle diplomacy. Al-Monitor says Pakistan had already signaled back in March, weeks into the war, that it wanted to be the go-between, and that groundwork is now pointing toward a formal signing ceremony in Switzerland. So the leverage is geography, a direct military-to-military line into Trump's orbit, and a willingness to do the unglamorous message passing neither side wants to own in public.
But Pakistan has its own enormous domestic problems. Is there a real risk Islamabad just doesn't have the bandwidth to see this through to a durable deal?
That tension is real, and analysts at both CFR and The Diplomat have flagged it directly. The same political instability that made Pakistan a pariah could limit how much diplomatic capital it can keep spending. Watch whether Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Field Marshal Munir keep moving in lockstep, because the civilian-military split is where Pakistan's credibility as a broker could crack. If that Switzerland signing ceremony on June 19th holds, it would be the clearest proof yet that Islamabad has enough runway to deliver.
If Iran War Daily is part of your daily situational awareness, try Ebola Watch, a weekday briefing on DRC and Uganda outbreak updates, case counts, border tracing, WHO vaccine news, and traveler guidance. Find it wherever you listen to podcasts. Next, we're watching Geneva, where teams are expected Friday for the agreement's next phase. We're also watching whether the Strait of Hormuz reopening turns into mine clearing, insurable voyages, and clean commercial transits, and whether the 60-day talks can settle the nuclear terms, from uranium disposition to inspections. Links to every story we covered are in the show notes, if you want to dig into the pieces that stood out. That's Iran War Daily for today. This is a Lantern podcast.